So right now, Christian's going to demonstrate connection to the router using an IP address, which is an address identifying the network connection there at the site.
So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to verify that my port forwarding rules are correct so that I can connect to the Lantronix serial device server that's at the Shoshone-Bannock site from my office here in Fort Collins. So I'm going to go to my port forwarding rules on the router, and you're going to see two entries on the table here. The first entry, where the external port is 4000, gets forwarded to 192.168.0.99 on 4000. That is my connection information to connect to the Zeno logger that's collecting all the data. The 192.168.0.99 address is the Lantronix serial device server, but it's programmed to pass on this connection information in order to connect to the Zeno. But if I want to connect to the Lantronix itself, I'm going to have to use a different internal port that the Lantronix is configured for. So I've specified an external port 3000 that I'm going to use from my office to connect to that same IP address, but on port 80. And port 80 is the HTTP server port the Lantronix is configured to accept so you can look at its settings. So I'm going to use the WAN IP address, which you can't see here because it's been blocked out for security purposes, on port 3000. And it should take me right into the Lantronix because I've already logged in before, so the password information it shouldn't ask for again during this session. Now it's important that all your network devices have their passwords changed to something that's not default, especially if it's accessible from the outside world for security reasons. So now we can look at this Lantronix serial device server configuration. Now, there's other serial device servers out there that can be used. So this is just one particular make and model, but they all get configured in a similar fashion. So we can see that the IP address is at 192.168.0.99. That's the LAN IP address. Obviously, in my web browser, I used the WAN IP address, and the router routed me to the Lantronix internally. This 192.168.0.1 default gateway, that is the LAN IP address of the router. And then lastly, the other important item is the configuration of the Lantronix serial settings. This particular Lantronix only has one serial port. It's been configured to be an RS-232 type connection, set at 9600 baud, 8 data bits, no parity, 1 stop bit, and no flow control. And this is, I believe, typical for connecting to the Zenos, but obviously the Zeno settings have to match for a serial connection to work. If I go to my server settings here, there's a password that we can set that's not the default. And then the other important feature here is that this port 80, that's the HTTP server port that I'm connecting to right now in order to access the settings on the Lantronix. As you saw on the port forwarding table, from the outside, I'm using the WAN plus this external port 3000 that's going to this internal port LAN and internal IP address and port 80 that connects to the Lantronix. I don't think there's anything under serial tunnel that we need to configure for this Lantronix because we're not using it in this fashion. We'll go to the channel 1 settings. This is where you're going to see that it's set to that RS-232 protocol with the appropriate baud rates and data bits, parity, stop bits. Everything else in here by default is usually the correct settings, so we don't need to mess with anything here. And then the other side of this is this connection tab. And this is where we see the port 4000. So when the Lantronix sees incoming traffic and it's specifying port 4000, it knows to forward it on to the Lantronix under that RS-232 connection. And that's it. This is a one-port Lantronix, so there's only one port to configure, and it's pretty simple. So next, I'm going to demonstrate now the connection going to the Zeno that's going through this Lantronix serial device server on port 4000. To connect to the Zeno logger, I am going to use Hyperterminal. And I've already got the connections saved. Verifying the information. There's the WAN right here that's blacked out for security purposes. Port 4000, because if you saw on the router, I'm using 4000 and just forwarding to 4000. That doesn't have to be the case. As long as you match the WAN and port together correctly and the LAN and internal port correctly, this will work. And so now I'm connected. And for the Zenos, Shift-U, enter, brings up the password. I'm typing in the site password, which I will not identify for security purposes. And I get the menu system. And so what Crest does is Crest goes in and retrieves data, and it comes in a similar fashion to what you're going to see here, using the data retrieval menu. And I'm just going to specify the last number of records here by using that command. So I'll do L10, and I'll get the last 10 commands. And then you can see all the comma delimited data come across the screen. And that's what Crest grabs and delimitates and parses out to grab the data from the site. And then to quit, it's that Shift-Q. Oops. And now we've logged off, and then we disconnect. And now the Zeno is ready to accept the next connection. This connection can only be done one at a time. So if someone else is logged in, the next person trying to connect will not be able to connect until that first person logs off. That's pretty typical for a serial connection system. If this was a logger that was on TCP/IP and had its own Ethernet port, sometimes those systems could actually support multiple connections simultaneously.
Great. Thank you, Christian. I appreciate that overview.